the Labour Party has written to the government urging it to bring forward legislation to stop media companies running dangerous anti-vaccine content. In a way, they want to stop anti-vaxxers from saying what they believe and stop people being able to read and to hear what anti-vaxxers believe, or even people who are just cautious about vaccines. Should these people have their right to free speech stamped out? We're going to talk to a guy now who knows all about free speech because he's the boss of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. Evening, Toby.
Evening, Kevin.
I'm worried about this. Think about anti-vaxxers. As I know it's fashionable to condemn them and to demonise them, but personally, I think that they're wrong on most issues around vaccines. However, they have the right to be wrong. They have the right to have their opinions, and as such, they have the right to have their opinions heard and be debated. I don't take kindly to the Labour Party's illiberal move to shut them up, to silence them.
Well, what was rather surprising about this call from the Labour Party for social media companies to be doing more to censor anti-vaxxers is that it's almost unimaginable that they could be doing more. It shows just how out of touch the Labour Party is, that it's apparently unaware that for the past 8 months, social media companies have been zealously censoring anyone who dissents from COVID orthodoxy. I mean, I'll give you some examples, Kevin. I posted a video on YouTube in which I was in discussion with Michael Levitt, who won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2014. And YouTube took that down. That was a violation of their community standards.
So some weird outrider.
Lionel Shriver, the award-winning novelist who wrote Let's Talk About Kevin. She read out her latest Spectator column on YouTube. That was removed because that violated their community standards. And again, it was because she was, a COVID dissident. Facebook have just censored the channel of Anna Breeze, a former BBC journalist. Twitter censored a tweet by Scott Atlas, who's on the White House's coronavirus task force, because he expressed a few reservations about the effectiveness of masks. I mean, social media companies could not be doing more to suppress and silence anyone who challenges, even in the most reasonable way, even if they're a Nobel Prize winning scientist. If you challenge COVID orthodoxy, you get silenced by social media. Wake up, Keir Starmer. Where have you been for 18 months?
Well, let's move on to the social media companies, because I don't think they should be doing this. I mean, anti-vaxxing might not be fashionable, but a lot of people hold these opinions. And why shouldn't they be allowed to hold these opinions? It's up to the vaxxers, if you like, to persuade them that they're wrong. Open debate is the way to kill off anti-vaxxing, if it should be killed off. Surely the oxygen of public discourse is what will get the anti-vaxxing movement to decline.
Yeah, I mean, there was a famous judgment by a Supreme Court justice called Louis Brandeis, and he was asked to censor what somebody was saying on the grounds that it was false and could be potentially danger. It could endanger the public to be told this false information. And his response was, in his judgment, the remedy for bad speech, the remedy for fake information is not to silence the person disseminating the false information. The remedy is not less speech, but more speech. And that has to apply in the case of the anti-vaxxers. I mean, like you, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've had my kids vaccinated. I got vaccinated myself. I'll probably take the COVID vaccine. Not sure, but probably. Need a bit more information.
Yeah, me too.
But nonetheless, people who have reservations about the COVID vaccine, they might be perfectly well-founded. They might not be. But if you're confident that the vaccine is safe and effective, you shouldn't have anything to worry about them making their arguments in the public square. You should be confident that if you have evidence and reason and science on your side, you'll be able to defeat them in open debate and discussion. If you criminalize them, if you say, as the head of counterterrorism did just 2 days ago, that new laws should be passed so we can prosecute and jail anyone who dissents from the kind of vaccine orthodoxy, you're going to persuade fence sitters that, you know, they have something to hide, that in an open debate, they couldn't defeat these people. So they've had to invoke the criminal law to shut them up, because actually looks like they've got a point. That's what the fence sitters will conclude. If you want to allay people's fears about taking the COVID vaccine to make sure there's maximum uptake, the way to do that is to engage in open scientific discussion and debate, not to threaten anyone who challenges the orthodoxy about these vaccines with a jail sentence. It's just insane.
I know, and what worries me is the atmosphere that seems to have been created around particularly the coronavirus crisis. If you're a parent, or even if you're just thinking about yourself, surely the proposition or the imminent arrival of a vaccine for COVID, or a couple of vaccines for COVID, which we know have been produced in haste. They've been produced very, very quickly under pressure. We know that the authorizing bodies have been asked to authorize or to deem these usable in emergency conditions very, very quickly. I mean, it seems to me extremely wrong to demonize a parent who's having at least thoughts about whether or not they want to give this vaccine to their kids.
Absolutely. I mean, don't forget, Kevin, that the vaccine that was produced in similar circumstances, when there was a similar panic, I mean, not quite on the scale of the coronavirus panic, but a similar panic about swine flu. So a vaccine was fast-tracked. It was brought out. Lots of people took it. After they'd taken it, it was discovered that one of the side effects of taking that vaccine, for some people, not many, but some, was narcolepsy, whereby you involuntarily fell asleep. Sometimes behind the wheel of a car. There is a court, which is part of the English and Welsh court system, called the Vaccine Damage Court, where people can apply for damages if they've suffered ill effects from taking vaccines. The big pharmaceutical companies are absolved of liability, so the taxpayer has to fork out. And so far, the taxpayer has forked out 60 million in damages for people who've suffered side effects from taking the swine flu vaccine. Now, I'm not saying that any of the COVID vaccines are likely to have similarly catastrophic side effects. They probably won't, but it's perfectly legitimate for people to raise their concerns and express their anxieties about this in the public square. They shouldn't be criminalized for that. That's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, especially since the authorities have, and the medical people involved have conceded that by definition they cannot promise that there won't be long-term side effects from these COVID jabs, because clearly, they haven't had time to test them in the long term. They've all been tested in the short term. As you say, Toby, I suspect it'll be fine. I will certainly consider taking it myself, and I wouldn't want to discourage people from taking it. But I don't appreciate the demonization of people who, if not having second thoughts, are cautious about this. It's the only logical approach to these hastily produced vaccines, if you ask me. While you're on, Toby, what's your feeling about the continued lockdown and the fact we might get more lockdowns, 25 days, 5 days for each day off at Christmas? This is just going on forever, non-stop, isn't it?
It's the forever lockdown, Kevin. We were initially told when the lockdown was imposed on the 23rd of March that it would probably be for about 3 weeks. And it ended up being until the middle of July. We've been told this time that the second lockdown's due to end on December 2nd. Now they're talking about extending it in all but name until Christmas Eve, and then allowing us to have a few days off, provided we're on our best behavior, and then reimposing it again. It's just absurd. I'm absolutely convinced that the harm caused by these lockdowns is far greater, far outweighs the harms they prevent. And I don't just mean economic harm. The economic harm outweighs the lives that are being saved by these consequences, by these measures. I think that the harm to public health, the harm to human life as a result of these restrictions, placing us under house arrest, discouraging us from getting medical treatment for important diseases, postponing cancer screening programs, making it impossible to get an appointment with your GP. All of those things, I think, will ultimately result in a greater loss of life than life saved by these restrictions. So I don't think there are really any grounds on which you can justify these continuing measures.
Toby, you work for The Spectator, a very highly respected journalist. You know people in high places. You went to university with the damn Prime Minister, for God's sake. Have you got any sense from your contacts why it is that this government is absolutely intransigent about listening to the other forms of science that say exactly what you just said, that lockdowns actually aren't very effective? In fact, they do more harm than good, and there is another way forward. Protect the vulnerable, the rest of us get back to normal. Why won't the government even acknowledge that people are saying this? There is now a serious body of scientific opinion urging the government to back down from its lockdown obsession. Why won't it?
I think there are, broadly speaking, two reasons, and this isn't based, I should stress, on any inside information. But I think there are two reasons, as far as I can tell. The first is that they calculated, I think, back in March, and may still think to this day, these are, the people making the decisions in Downing Street, that they would be more severely punished for every person they caused to die from COVID through their inaction than for every person they caused to die from other causes by their actions. Now, you could say to them, look, here's a cost-benefit analysis. Here's the evidence that these restrictions are actually causing a greater loss of life from non-COVID causes than they are saving people from dying from COVID. That wouldn't matter. And the reason that wouldn't matter is because they've just calculated, based on focus groups, opinion polls, that the public are going to care more about preventing people dying from COVID than they are about the collateral damage caused by those preventative measures. And they may still think that that's true, even after all this time, and even after the evidence mounts up of the colossal collateral damage caused by these overzealous attempts to prevent people from dying of COVID. I think the second consideration is that having made that calculation initially and having locked down at enormous public costs, not just economically, but in terms of public health, having made that calculation, I think it's difficult for them to say now, oh, we made a mistake, because then it looks as though all the suffering we've had to endure as a consequence of that policy decision was unnecessary. They can't say, actually, we were wrong. The lockdown policy is ineffective, probably didn't prevent much transmission, caused much more harm than good. We're sorry, and we're now going to do something different. Because then they'd have to take responsibility for all the harm that those measures caused. So it's easier politically to double down. And even if they have doubts, to suppress them and say, no, this is the right strategy. We're going to pursue it until the end of the earth.
So we are trapped in a vortex of mistakes and madness. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I should mention, Toby, you've got an excellent article about the anti-vaxxing issue in the new edition of The Spectator. Always a pleasure, Toby. Thank you so much for your time. That's Toby Young, a Spectator writer and the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is the home of free speech, Talk Radio.